In 1859, the United States and Great Britain nearly initiated a global war over a dead farm animal. The conflict happened here, on San Juan Island, a small patch of land sitting squarely between modern Washington State and Vancouver Island. To understand how a pig almost started a conflict of this scale, we have to look back to the early 1800s. For decades, both the US and Britain claimed the exact same territory across the entire Pacific Northwest. Control over this region meant dominance over the multi-million-dollar fur trade and a permanent strategic foothold on the northern Pacific coast. When two aggressively expanding nations push into the same territory, the lack of a defined border turns every local interaction into a potential act of war. In 1846, diplomats tried to resolve the tension by signing the Oregon Treaty. The document established a continental boundary by drawing a clean, straight line across the map along the 49th parallel. That solved the mainland border. But when the line reached the coast, the treaty's language became incredibly vague. It simply stated the border should follow the channel separating the mainland from Vancouver Island. The problem? There were two channels, the Haro and Rosario Straits. The San Juan Islands were trapped in the middle. The US and Britain read the exact same text, and both concluded the islands were clearly theirs. On the ground, this meant American farmers and British employees of the Hudson's Bay Company were living side by side on the exact same island, completely disagreeing on whose laws applied to their daily lives. This single, poorly worded sentence turned the island into a place where common law didn't exist, ensuring that even a minor property dispute would reach the highest levels of international government. On June 15, 1859, the tension finally broke. An American settler named Lyman Cutler found a pig rooting through his garden and destroying his potato crop. The pig belonged to a British Hudson's Bay Company employee, so Cutler shot it. Normally, a judge would simply order Cutler to pay for the dead livestock, but because neither country recognized the other's authority on the island, there was no mutual court to handle the dispute. No one could agree on who had the legal right to arrest the shooter. British authorities threatened to arrest Cutler themselves and bring him to trial in their own courts. In response, the American civilians sent an urgent petition demanding armed protection from the US military. Without an agreed-upon system of law, basic property damage bypassed civil mediation entirely. Within days, an argument over a ruined vegetable garden escalated directly into a demand for military intervention. The U.S. Army answered the call by sending Captain George Pickett, who later led the famous charge at Gettysburg, with a small force of infantrymen. Pickett did not act like a peacekeeper. He declared the island to be strictly American soil and openly defied any British attempt to exercise authority. The British Empire responded by deploying a fleet of heavily armed naval warships just offshore, loaded with hundreds of Marines. The military reality was lopsided. A tiny, isolated American camp sat entirely outgunned, completely surrounded by overwhelming British naval firepower. Yet the cannons stayed silent. The British naval commanders on the scene hesitated. They possessed the firepower to obliterate the American camp, but they realized that starting a global war over a dead pig was impossible to justify to their superiors back in London. The rigid posturing of two national militaries had pushed both nations to the absolute brink. Peace relied entirely on the personal restraint and common sense of a few commanders standing in the field. To defuse this situation, the United States dispatched General Winfield Scott, a highly experienced diplomat, to override the local commanders and end the military ego clash. Scott negotiated a bizarre but effective compromise. Both sides agreed to a joint military occupation. American troops set up camp on the south end of the island, while British troops established their own camp in the north. For the next 12 years, enemy soldiers lived in a state of peaceful coexistence. While their distant governments bickered over the legal boundary, the troops on San Juan Island routinely visited each other, shared supplies, and hosted joint banquets. It was a decade where an awkward, highly structured stalemate on the ground proved safer than forcing a violent conclusion. The stalemate finally broke in 1872. Both nations agreed to let a neutral third party settle the boundary dispute once and for all, submitting the case to international arbitration overseen by Kaiser Wilhelm I of Germany. The Kaiser's commission reviewed the maps and sided with the United States. The Haro Strait became the official border, and the commission formally awarded the San Juan Islands to the U.S., prompting a peaceful British withdrawal. The crisis had grown out of a few imprecise words on a map, and it was only resolved when both nations realized the cost of the standoff outweighed the value of the island. History is usually recorded as a series of grand battles or brilliant kings, but sometimes the survival of an empire turns on a single potato patch.